Hello, my spacefaring friends. My name is Martin, and I will be your galactic host in this video. Well, before I begin, I just want to say to my patrons, I'm sorry if we've been a little slow with content lately. We do have a Stargrave game going on, but Julie and I were not feeling well at all this weekend. I was feeling very weak and just not good at all. And so, well, a lot of content that I was planning for Monday has been postponed, and now today, fortunately, Tuesday, I am feeling better. Today's Tuesday, February 3rd, and we still have Snowmageddon out there. A lot of snow. So, yeah, it's been kind of slow, and I am restricted in the winter time because of the smaller space. I don't have the large studio, which is closed over the winter, so content is definitely a lot slower. But that doesn't mean that we can't work on some cool lore and cool scratch builds. And in this video, what I want to do is show you guys my newer little fleet, scratch build fleet. I'm going to talk about it a little bit, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of story time. We're going to go into the lore for these ships, because I am creating a lot of lore, a lot of world building this year, and producing some digital perks for my patrons. You're going to see a lot more digital stuff coming your way for people to download. So here is the small fleet that I created. I had to stop Sunday because I was feeling so sick. But I got a basic starter fleet built, and we see here that the fleet is arranged in size classes. We have these smaller frigates or corvettes, depending on the kind of game that I'm playing, these designations would change. But these, if using Void Admiral fleet construction rules, then these are usually put into squadrons, usually designated frigates or corvettes. And then we have the medium-sized vessels, which represent things like light cruisers or heavy frigates. And finally, we have the lead vessel or flagship. And in this case, it's something that could represent a heavy cruiser, a heavy battle cruiser, or something of the like. So let's look at the design a little bit as I move away from starships that are a little more, space opera, more Navy-like vessels, right? Not that there's anything wrong with space opera. I love me a good space opera game. But I am moving a little bit away from that kind of theme and going more into, think the Expanse, TV show The Expanse, some of the starship designs there and the way ships fight. These vessels, like this one in particular, which is a capital ship, these vessels would have kinetic weapons. They can have energy weapons. I am going to include them since so many games have energy weapons. But these are limited and mostly towards defense, shooting down enemy missiles and the like. So there are weapons like that. I also have railguns, of course, missiles, many smart munitions, combat drones, and the like. So instead of starfighters, I may have like waves of combat drones that are carried by many of these capital ships, okay? So that's my capital ship. These things are built with a variety of recycled materials. This one is actually, the hull is a clothespin. Is a wooden clothespin with mesh, and we see the wall anchors there for the engines, and the little turrets are all made out of mesh, and little sequin caps. So it's a variety of recycled materials. Here's an example of a pen cap that becomes an engine nozzle. And I really like that color too, so I may even leave it like that. Then we have, of course, the medium vessels. These will be like heavy frigates, but notice that the weapons are all around the ship, not just on top, the way Navy vessels are designed. These things have weapon systems all around the ship, and These weapons have, as you have seen in The Expanse, if you've ever seen that TV show, I do highly recommend it, by the way, especially the later seasons. It's a little bit slow when it starts, but it's a good show. Anyway, they use kinetic weapons very similar to the Navy phalanx guns that we see in our own Navy, designed as defensive weapons, but also offensive weapons here in my fiction. So these weapons would have full mobility and can fire as the ship spins around in space as it rotates. These ships will be used with rules like full thrust and infinite dark, which have interesting space mechanics. Here is another heavy frigate with two wing-like additions that are really weapon mounts, you know. Normally, this is a sort of a version of a heavy frigate with two missile tubes right there on the ship. And then we have these smaller vessels. These are all of the escort vessels, light frigates, corvettes, and the like, all of which were built using various kinds of caps and other materials, mainly caps, those little cylinders that adorn the ship. Those are actually Q-tips that I cut up. And we even see the interlocking bases there for cable ties. They become the bow structure for this frigate. Now, I still have to fix the bases. The bases are temporary, and once the bases are completely built and the fleet is painted, it will be designated the Terran Authority Prime Fleet. That will be its official name, and I have a whole lore that's coming. In addition to that, I will be building two smaller fleets, and then Julie and I will decide what kind of game rules we're going to use, whether it's going to be infinite dark, full thrust, you know, Void Admiral rules even. Either that or, I don't know, we may decide to do full thrust even though the rules are a little crunchier. They are a classic space game and one which is similar to the kind of lore that I'm trying to build here. Now each ship took anywhere from 20 minutes to build to a total of 30 minutes. And basically that was mostly trying to choose what components I'm going to use to build the ship. There were a lot of little pen caps. There's even a couple of wall anchors. As I said before, those plastic wall anchors are great engine pieces. They can also form great little bow pieces, and they're very inexpensive. You can get these things fairly inexpensive. I had a whole bunch of them due to some extra ones from house projects and putting up shelves and stuff. So I took those wall anchors and they've become very interesting for building starships, maybe even aircraft and things of that nature later on. So I'm trying to build these fleets. This will bring up my starship collection to nearly 200 handmade ships in the time that it's taken to build up this channel. All right, very quickly, let me just highlight some details of my new lore project. All my lore is going on a new zine that I call Star Builder, and Star Builder second edition is already on my Patreon. And I think for the time being, Star Builder is going to stay on Patreon. But, you know, I don't know, maybe in the future I'll put it on Drive-Thru-RPG. We'll see. It's a very generic star building information, and I even include decks of cards that I'm creating that help with solar system creation and solar infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. So the core system is broken into Terra Prime, the Terran Space Authority, or TSA, which includes the lunar colonies and whatever infrastructure the lunar colonies have developed. All of this together forms Terran Prime. which is of course the cradle of humanity. It has a lot of emotional and historical importance for all the colonies, despite the recent desires by some colonial bureaucracies to become independent of Terra Prime. The colonies are still very much a part of the economic stability of Terra Prime, and so it doesn't necessarily like the idea of complete independence from some of these colonial bureaucracies. The inner system, the inner solar system, is composed of Terra Prime, the Moon and Earth, and then we have Mars, which is managed by the Martian Colonial Administration, which is become a separate bureaucratic entity from Terran Prime, but they're not necessarily looking for independence from Terra. They're comfortable still working under the Terran Space Authority, and indeed, Terra Prime gets a lot of its resources and base economy from these Martian colonies. They are some of the oldest colonies in the solar system, aside from the Moon. The Moon was first. The Martian Colonial Administration was later developed to ease the pressure on Terran bureaucracy, kind of removed it so that they can administer their own resources, and as the colonies grew, it became more and more complex. Infrastructure was needed to manage the colonies so that the colonies can become self-sufficient in Mars. So this was very important. So the formation of the Martian Colonial Administration works under Terran Prime. Mars is critical for a lot of the mining that it oversees, primarily mining in the asteroid belt and also mining in Mars itself. Now, in the inner sphere, we have another interesting colony, which is the Venusian sky colonies, and these form the Venusian aerostat community, which is, again, just a series of small colonies in the inhospitable atmosphere of Venus. Now, these colonies are self-sufficient to some extent, but still rely very heavily on Terra for supplies and for a lot of the technology that was necessary in order to create the sky cities, because, again, Venusian atmosphere is very hostile. They do harvest important chemicals, a chemo harvesting industry that is led by these sky cities, and they're, while very small, still very important in the Terran economy. So they have a very small security force, which is independent of Terra, and this was done purposely so Terran fleets, like the one we see here, don't have to extend themselves too much. So each of these colonial administrations have their own security forces, planetary security forces, which in this case is the Venusian Aerostat Security Wing, VASW acronym. And yes, acronyms can be annoying, but they sound very official as well. So this little security force does help keep security within the Venusian system. And that pretty much explains the inner sphere. Now, the outer sphere is very interesting in that it has as its dominant colonial infrastructure. It's one of the largest that humans have ever accomplished. The Jovian system includes Jupiter and Saturn at their heart. And as you guys know, the Jupiter and Saturn both have many, many moons. And so the prime colony here for the system, the capital colony, as we can call it, is Enceladus. And Enceladus, which is part of Saturn, is where all of the governing bureaucracy for the system is actually located. Now, the Jovian sector is very important, and it's grown not only in population and all the different colonies that it has to manage, but it's also grown economically thanks to the gas harvesting technology that was developed by the Jovian system in conjunction with Terra. And these gas harvests they produce everything from very important propulsion systems, and gas harvesting, of course, has needs its own security forces, and also the Jovian system was in charge of actually maintaining shipping lanes that connect the Jovian system to the core system. So Jovian colonial administration is actually quite large. It sees itself wanting to use more of its economic prowess for itself rather than siphoning out a lot of this to the inner systems. It wants to maintain its growth, its populations, its colonies, which have expanded quite painfully throughout a lot of tragedy and a lot of problems that occurred in the historical colonization of the Jovian system. So the Jovian system has become more and more its own political entity, its own cultural entity. And this worries Terra. And as we will see, this will be the source of conflict between the Jovian system and Mars, which will, of course, inevitably draw in Terran Prime. Basically, that is also known as the Jovian sector. And then past the Jovian sector, we have the Neptunian sector. Now, the Neptunian sector was once part of the Jovian system, but it gained its independence, namely because basically the Jovian system couldn't maintain the needs of the sector. It needed to become independent so it could become self-sufficient and wouldn't stress the resources on the Jovian system, so that it could basically concentrate its own resources so that the colonies can prosper. The Jovian system went through a very hard and difficult colonial history with a lot of tragedy involved, colonies failing, and so trying to control another sector like the Neptunian sector was just impossible. So Neptunian sector came to be its own thing. Now, it's a very small sector, not very many colonies. It's a very harsh sector, and it's also known as the outer colonies. Now, the Neptunian sector holds contracts with Terra and the Jovian sector to become in charge of exploring the Kuiper Belt. So they're seen as the deep spacefarers, and eventually they're conducting all kinds of experiments and things that will allow humans to leave the solar system. And there's a very strong desire to leave the solar system because of one major thing, and that's the knowledge that our beloved sun will one day become a red giant. And when that happens, all the core systems will be engulfed by this red giant. Now, in space terms, obviously there's a lot of time paradox here, and space-time is very different. You know, when we say soon, that could mean 1,000 years, it could mean 1,000,000 years. You know, I mean, time passes differently in space for sure. Now, the Neptunian sector has come over a lot of criticism by the Jovian colonial administrations and by Terra itself. It's come under criticism because these bureaucracies blame the Neptunian sector for allowing pirate organizations and other things, other shady deals to take place within the outer reaches. And that's because The Neptunian colonies, I mean, they're very harsh, and these are the outer reaches of the solar system. And so the idea is that a lot of space organizations, pirate organizations, they're attracted to these areas because they're out of the main bureaucracies, and they can conduct all kinds of piracy, and you know, they're basically using the Neptunian sector as a base of operations. This will be the source of conflict later on, but for the time being, it's sort of seen as a neutral sector. It won't get involved into the colonial civil wars that are going to happen between the Jovian sector and the core sphere. Tehran is going to be forced into the conflict, but let's make it clear, conflict in space is deadly and brutal, and there aren't going to be any shields or anything like that on military vessels. Conflict is pretty decisive, and starships and star fleets, they're a very expensive commodity. They're a very expensive portion of colonial security and orbital security. And so, like I said earlier, when a capital ship shows up with its escorts, it means that things are really bad. So most battles will be smaller battles with, ships performing various objectives. And the only time a fleet actually comes together is during, let's say, planetary offensives or anything of the sort. And we do have nuclear doctrines in many of these military organizations. So yeah, when nukes are involved, things change very quickly. So we'll continue exploring this. This is just a draft, and one of the main things is that when I make my lore, I sketch out a piece of lore, and then I let my games fill in the spaces. So I don't just sit there and spend a month trying to develop all these little details. I let my games actually fill in a lot of the details, and that includes RPGs or miniature war games. So some of these details are best expanded through RPG sessions. On RPGs, we can explore the narrative a lot deeper, and other military details and battles can be expanded through miniature war games, scenarios, and narratives. And that's basically how I plan to work it. We will have to wait until the big studio opens up for a lot of these things to take place, but we can start developing lore now. And so for scratch building, the objective is to get the Martian security forces built, and also a fleet for the Jovian sector. And who knows, maybe I'll create a table for the Venusian sky cities that I have in mind. So with scratch building and your imagination, really there's no limit. Now, one aspect that I am wanting to detail a little more is the changes that happen to humans when they become spacefaring. There's a lot of information about that right now, as that could really affect future space travel in the real world. And I'm talking about genetic drift and evolutionary changes that happen to the human body when they are in zero gravity over time, especially in colonies where we assume reproduction is taking place. So I do have some ideas about genetic drift and some of the changes that will take place to these populations. Now, they're not going to be like complete, like alien looking or anything like that. They're still humans, but there are some really important changes and genetic problems that our colonies will have to deal with. And these problems will be best expressed or explored with RPG sessions. And I don't know quite yet what RPG. Maybe Stars Without Number, that might be a good system to explore as an RPG. And I also have GURPS as well. So we'll see. Okay, so I will be talking about scenario writing in future videos, and I will expand on this lore. Each sector for our solar system, I will have a separate video for describing some of the lore behind it, okay? So that's basically it. And if you're interested in Star Builder, check out our Patreon. All of this stuff I will be writing up into documents that will go as digital perks on my Patreon, all right? Including the new card decks and everything that I'm creating for world building and star building. All right, thank you very much, folks. I hope that you guys find yourselves in good health, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great one.